To begin to look at casualty figures in ancient Greek battles, we must first look at our sources. Peter Krentz, in his work Casualties in Hoplite Battles, is considered a seminal piece in this field, but there are some issues. As he notes, the sources are quite small, already being Thucydides, Xenophon, and Diodorus. To begin with, Krentz puts that Thucydides is usually good and inquisitive about finding out the casualty rates, and honest about him guessing. But there has been work on this field that puts forth the notion that we should take Thucydides' figure with enough salt to make Scipio Aemilianus proud. Thucydides is referred to by scholars apparently as Thucydides the tape recorder for his stalwart quote-unquote scientific research. Thucydides himself is not consistent with his casualty figures, and is prone to rounding or using information that reflects more the troops going into battle than the actual rates of the fallen. Thucydides tends to reiterate the same figures at an alarming rate. 200 and 300 occur 7 times, 1,000 is found 4 times, 123 times, 50, 700, and 800 occur twice. He also simply lacks sources. As Catherine Rubinkamp notes, Thucydides lacked qualified information of the Peloponnesians. Thucydides did work with some accurate information of his countrymen, or his ex-countrymen for that matter. He did get information from the Athenian side following his exile, but the casualty figures of the Athenians might have been more to the biases, as some of them have been rounded up. Being exiled might have caused him to express that the Athenians suffered heavy losses throughout the war to fit his own narrative. Also, Thucydides does not differentiate between hoplites, cavalry, and skirmishers, further muddling the field of casualty rates in ancient Greece. When Thucydides notes on actual tactics of the war, such as his interest in the Sicilian expedition and cavalry, there are 53 references to cavalry in the Sicilian expedition, and he marks 70 horses down as a casualty, but men were able to save themselves. Thucydides can be infrequent, and his figures can either reflect his own narrative or interest. Rubinkamp and other scholars doubt he actually worked to get records, and his estimates are made by those who fought in battle. Thucydides was working on the information in the 5th century, a hard work for any historian. A historian that Krentz uses when Thucydides is not available is Diodorus, and even in Krentz's own estimation, he is prone to wild exaggeration, often putting extreme cases for the size of armies. Yet he is still used and provides what Krentz calls reasonable guesses on some battles. Xenophon usually does not give numbers to casualty reports, but we will see later in the Battle of Lectra that he actually does. Often, most of the losses would be occurred following after the battle, once formations have broke. And the myth of the heavily armed panoply of the hoplite does not hold against stones hurled by light armored troops. Krentz puts forward that the common wound suffered was to the leg, and had a 75% survival rate. Casualty reports do not accurately reflect the nature of Greek ancient warfare. Often those who lost would be allowed to retrieve their dead and wounded after 3 days. If one were to suffer a wound, be knocked out, there would be 3 days without medical attention. It was not till the campaigns of Alexander that the Macedonian armies, who would have very low casualty rates due to their weaponry and superior armor and also medical attention. But for the most part, deaths occurred when the formation was broken. The Greeks put massive importance on their war dead. This is mostly of religious importance, but also as a state practice as seen through Athens. Athens is probably the most accurate in terms of their own casualty rates. A stelae were their tombstones, and would be put with a mound as the mass grave. But these men were held in high honor. A stelae acts as a source in some cases, as they only survive in fragments. But we know stelae were marked down by tribes, also in the same order in the fragments that survive today. Other cities did practice this as well, but Athenians had the leaders of each tribe have a list of the men drafted, and knew to either gather their war dead. So, there are 2 records available to Athenians, that of the tribe and the stelae. An example of the Athenians' adherence to their dead was the story of Nicias, who realized that 2 bodies were missing after battle, and sent heralds to recover them. Athenians would honor their dead through speeches and funeral celebrations, marking the deed of their dead. Another reason for their meticulous record keeping is that all those who died in battle, their widows and orphans would be taken care of by the state. Perhaps as a democracy and their recognition of their dead would lead to added public opinion against the Herculean strategy of the Peloponnesian War compared to the Spartans. Questions arise from the Athenian stelae, as sometimes the stelae by Polynesians would mark those involved in the naval theater. So these were not inherently just for those who fought in the battle, but could reflect other theaters of war too. Using Krentz's table and casualties, the costliest battle was the Battle of Garas, but this is according to Diodorus, so take it with a lot of salt. Acarnanites would lose 4,000 out of 20,000 men. This would be an astonishing 20% of their army. Yet these numbers are not to scoff at, even our own modern age of huge battles. Manpower is consistently an issue for city-states, especially Sparta. In the Battle of Leuctra, who in which Xenophon puts the Spartan dead at 1,000 and Diodorus puts 4,000. Again, Diodorus should be taken with some amount of speculation. Xenophon was closer to the source, as he stayed as a guest in Sparta, and notes that the paw marks had seen the dead and decided to set on a truce. Yet, as Kret points out, the death of 5% of the fighting force would not be any good for a city-state. One of the costliest defeats is the 413 BC siege of Syracuse. The winning side is not recorded in their losses, as the citizens had been involved, but the Athenians had lost either to 2,000 to 2,500 men, which represents 20 to 25% of the fighting force. The constant idea that battles in ancient Greece were light is not highly supported by the Greeks in this period. The expressions of many to state how many died in somewhat typical battles. It might have been a relatively few, but losing 5% of a fighting force could be extremely dangerous if a city-state is already unable to mobilize all available soldiers for war.